Hi, so today we're going to talk about evolution as genetic change. So natural selection affects which individuals survive and reproduce and which do not. So if an individual dies without reproducing, it does not contribute its alleles to the population's gene pool. So in other words, it doesn't pass on its genetics. So if an individual produces many offspring, its alleles stay in the gene pool and may increase in frequency. So if you have a trait that's an advantage in the environment, you have a better chance of surviving and passing on those genes to your children. If you don't have a trait that's very advantageous to the environment, you most likely will die and not pass on your genes. So we're going to see this change in allele frequency over time. So evolution is any change over time in the relative frequencies of alleles in a population. Populations, not individual organisms, can evolve over time. So natural selection on single gene traits can lead to changes in allele frequencies and thus to evolution. So we can see in this beetle population, the first generation, 75% have the green, 25% have the brown. In the second generation, we see a slight change in allele frequency. Now 71% have the green allele and 29% have the brown. So we can see the brown is increasing in frequency, just slightly. So organisms of one color may produce fewer offspring than organisms of other colors. For example, a lizard population is normally brown but has mutations that produce red and black forms. Red lizards are more visible to predators, so they will be less likely to survive and reproduce. Therefore, the allele for red color will become rare. So here's our initial population, 80% brown, 10% red, 10% black. Over time, after 10, 20, 30 generations, you see that actually the brown is decreasing, the black is increasing, and the red is gone completely. So black lizards may warm up faster on cold days. This may give them energy to avoid predators. In turn, they may produce more offspring. So the allele for black color will increase in relative frequency over time. So we see this. So if black's an advantage, you're going to see that the black allele is going to increase in frequency over generations. So natural selection can affect the distributions of phenotypes in any of three ways. We call these different types of selection: directional selection, stabilizing selection, and disruptive selection. So in directional selection, when individuals at one end of the curve have a higher fitness than individuals in the middle or at the other end, directional selection takes place. So the range of phenotypes shifts as some individuals survive and reproduce while others do not. So here's an example. So in this case, birds with larger beaks have a higher fitness. Therefore, the average beak size increases over time. So natural selection is favoring the larger beaks. So here's the original population, and the majority of the population had like medium-sized beaks right in the middle. But over time, because of food source in the environment, natural selection favored larger beaks. So we see this shift in the curve. And now the majority of the population has large beaks. Okay, they fall in the large beak category. So the average beak size increased over time. So the curve moves in one direction, which is why we call it directional selection. And it can move either way, but it moves in one direction. In stabilizing selection, individuals near the center of the curve have a higher fitness than individuals at either end of the curve. This is stabilizing selection. This keeps the center of the curve at its current position, but it narrows the overall graph. So, for example, human babies born at an average mass are more likely to survive than babies born either much smaller or much larger than average. So here's our original curve of birth mass of the babies. The majority fell in the middle, but over time, we see that the curve narrows and narrows and narrows. This is stable, right in the middle. I think stable is right in the middle, in the center of gravity. So the curve narrows, and more of the majority survive if they're born at an average rate. Okay, very little survive at low birth weight or high birth weight. Disruptive selection, on the other hand, is when individuals at the upper and lower ends of the curve have a higher fitness than individuals near the middle. It's disruptive selection. This means it disrupts the middle of the curve. If the pressure of natural selection is strong enough and long enough, the curve will split, creating two distinct phenotypes. So here's an example. If average-sized seeds become scarce, a bird population will split into two groups, one that eats small seeds and one that eats large seeds. So here's original. The majority fell right in the middle, had a medium-sized beak, but after time, because the environment changed, average-sized seeds became rare, and now we only have large seeds and small seeds. We see this disruption in the middle of the curve, and actually the majority of the population has small or large beaks. So random change in allele frequency is called genetic drift, okay? So this is a random event, okay? For example, we have a frog population. The majority are green, but a random event causes the death of the brown frogs, and now you only see green frogs. So in small populations, individuals that carry a particular allele may leave more descendants than other individuals do, just by chance. So this is a chance event, okay, that causes genetic drift. It is not natural selection. So over time, a series of chance occurrences of this type can cause an allele to become common in a population. Genetic drift may occur when a small group of individuals, for example, colonizes a new habitat. Individuals may carry alleles in different relative frequencies than the larger population from which they came. The new population will be genetically different from the parent population. So here's an example. Here's the parent population, okay, of beetles. And then we have just 4 beetles go off, and they found, it's called the founder effect, they found their own population. And these 4 beetles go off on their own and found their own population. And over time, these 2 populations that were founded look awfully different, not only from each other, but from the original population. So founding population A, founding population B, and now the descendants, the 2 populations look extremely different because we're only taking a small group of alleles and putting them somewhere else and allowing them to reproduce. So you see this genetic change in these populations, but it's not due to natural selection, it's just due to chance. It's just this founding population goes and starts a new colony. So when allele frequencies change due to migration of a small subgroup of a population, it's known as the founder effect. So here's the original population. Here's an allele that's really rare in the population. If that person starts their own population with a small subgroup, over time you're going to see that allele will increase in frequency because we started with, now we have a higher percentage of this allele compared to the whole population. So, evolution versus genetic equilibrium. The Hardy-Weinberg principle states that allele frequencies in a population will remain constant unless one or more factors cause those frequencies to change. When allele frequencies remain constant, it's called genetic equilibrium. This is when evolution is not occurring. 5 conditions are required to maintain genetic equilibrium from generation to generation. There must be random mating, population must be very large, there can be no movement into or out of the population, no mutations, and no natural selection. So then random mating ensures that each individual has an equal chance of passing on its alleles to offspring. In natural populations, mating is rarely completely random. Many species select mates based on particular heritable traits. This is very common. It's called sexual selection. There are certain traits that females look for in males, so mating is not random. You don't just bump into a guy and be like, oh, let's have children. It doesn't happen like that. Usually, there's a lot more that goes along with it. Your choice is not random. So, and then across from the room, their eyes met. So it's very rarely random. The population has to be large because genetic drift has less of an effect on large populations than small ones. So allele frequencies of large populations are less likely to be changed through the process of genetic drift. So genetic drift can cause changes in the population we saw with the founder effect. So here's a large population. Over time, the relative frequencies stay the same. But if we have a small subgroup go off, we can actually see a huge change due to genetic drift in the allele frequencies. There can be no movement in or out because we can't have new alleles coming in and alleles leaving. That would change allele frequencies. The population's gene pool must be kept together and kept separate from the gene pools of other populations. There can also be no mutations, because if there's mutations, we get new alleles, allele frequencies change, etc. And no natural selection. All genotypes in the population must have an equal probability of survival and reproduction. Otherwise, you're going to see the allele frequency change. No phenotype can have a selective advantage over another. There can be no natural selection operating on the population. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching.